no further ado, tonight's keynote speech. Representative John Conyers, Jr. is the kind of leader who brings us hope. He's been just such a leader since 1964, and as the second most senior member of the House of Representatives, he's currently serving his 21st term. Representative Conyers has worked hard representing Michiganders, as we're known. I'm from Michigan, and making sure that the nation continues to make progress despite any setbacks. Representative Conyers currently is the chair of the House Committee on the Judiciary. During his long tenure on the Judiciary Committee, he played a prominent role in the 1974 Watergate hearings and has overseen many issues concerning the Department of Justice, the federal courts, and other constitutional and civil rights issues. Representative Conyers was one of the 13 original founding members of the Congressional Black Caucus and is known as its dean. Over his past 43 years of service, Representative Conyers has had many landmark accomplishments. Notably, he was instrumental in securing passage of the 1994 Violence Against Women Act, the Motor Voter Bill of 1993, the Martin Luther King Holiday Act of 1983, and the Help America Vote Act of 2002. He's written many influential reports, most recently in the 2004 presidential election and the Iraq War. He's a tireless defender of the rights of those who lack access to quality health care, a staunch opponent to the Iraq War, and he's worked successfully to increase minimum wage. Representative Conyers has been given numerous awards throughout his lifetime, all of which are well-deserved. Just a few weeks ago, Representative Conyers received the Spingarn Medal from the NAACP, that organization's highest honor, and it was richly deserved. Now it is my honor to introduce to you all tonight's keynote speaker, Representative John Conyers.
Thanks, Lena Swarnston. Give her another round of applause. She's from Michigan. What a pleasure and honor it is for me to be here at the American Constitutional Society. 5 years worth. Peter Rubin, I never knew you'd get it this large and this successful. Give him a round of applause, please. Rubin. I've got a lot of friends here, and of course, anybody in politics for a short while would know not to do what I'm going to do. I'm going to name a few and leave out a whole lot. But Frank Wu is the head of Wayne State University, and that's where I graduated from, and I see him here. Frank. Then Spencer Overton has worked with me on voter integrity for so long. Thank you for being here. And of course, who doesn't know Robert Rubin? He's always on the scene in Washington. Thank you for all you have done and will be doing, Bob Rubin. Now, ladies and gentlemen, about 4 decades ago, I went into the speaker, then John McCormick, and made the case that I ought to be the first African American to go on the House Judiciary Committee. He called, picked up the phone. Hello, Wilbur. I'm going to send over young John Conyers, and I think he'd be a good candidate for Judiciary Committee. And so I started off. It happened that way, and gradually over the years, And finally, at this point in time, it's like an intersection of all of my entire career. There would be no more important, relevant time for me to be chair of this committee than right now. And it is my honor now to be the first African American chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. And I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased that the coincidence of what's happening in our country ties in with my ascension to the chair of what I consider the most powerful committee in the Congress. Why? Because we have the oversight of the Constitution and all its amendments. And to me, that alone, if we didn't have any other jurisdiction, would justify me claiming the importance of this great committee. But it has more than that. We have oversight over the Department of Justice. And that includes the Civil Rights Division, antitrust, long neglected, the criminal justice system, the federal corrections system, all the prisons, and sentencing guidelines such as they are, and it's immigration, drug enforcement, and it's a wonderful, wonderful set of responsibilities that I am guided by in the great experiences that I've had with two people in my life. One was Martin Luther King, Jr., who, of all the great people that I have had the honor of meeting in my career, Dr. Martin Luther King impressed me with his philosophy, his politics, and his religion, and all that came together in this starting of the civil rights movement with nonviolence. And to me that was an incredibly bold and wonderful strategy that he created. So I got to know him right after I got out of law school at Wayne University. I met then Rosa Parks, and I didn't know it, nor did she, that after her great contribution to desegregating public transportation in America, went all the way up to the Supreme Court, she could no longer find a job as a seamstress in Alabama, and so she came to Detroit just as I was beginning my first campaign. I'd never run for any office, and so I remember Rosa, quiet, humble. She didn't wear her religion on her sleeve. She was just who she was. There was no pretense, and she worked with me for almost the last, for 20 years, and almost up to the end of her own wonderful life. And so my father was a United Automobile representative, international representative for UAW, worked at Chrysler, and I used to go to all the Chrysler Local 7 picnics and Labor Day marches in Detroit. That's almost mandatory, and the holiday activities. And so out of that wonderful background, I now sit as the chair of this very important committee. Now, what the American Constitutional Society has been doing that is so important is that you are the new complement to where we're going in the 21st century. And how inspiring is it for me to see all of the distinguished judges that are here, veteran members of the bar, experienced practitioners in the United States Supreme Court, all here growing and understanding and living this wonderful experience that is ours and our responsibility to make sure democracy works, that we get back on track, that we get to a new direction. And so it's in that spirit I'm so proud to join you. Now let's pick the one subject that I again shouldn't be talking on. They said don't mention the I word anywhere you go, Congressman, because it will be said that that's what you were going to do anyway. And every now and then, this morning I got a phone call from a wonderful leader in Detroit, and she said, "This is it. We find out that slave labor was used to build this compound in Iraq." She said, "I've had it." And everybody's had it about something. And so as the person who has had more impeachment responsibilities than anybody on either side of the Capitol, and I got a visit from Cindy Sheehan the other day. She had 350 people with her. And I said, "Cindy, you come and see me all the time. What do we need this for?" She said, "Well, Mr. Chairman, we're here to, this is it. You're either going to accede to our demands or we're going to have to re-examine our relationship." And so I said, "Well, I want to do that, but I want to do it in a forum where we have discussions about this. It's not a matter of whether the 43rd president has committed impeachable acts or not, but the question is, what about the Vice President of the United States? Who is so, and of course, if I thought that that would stop the war in Iraq, that would be fabulous. That would, you'd get me on that. But you know what? Now that I've seen the growing disconnection between reality and the positions of the President of the United States, that is, that the worse things get in Iraq, the more upbeat and positive he seems to be, I begin to notice that this could need medical evaluation here. We've got a big problem. And the Vice President, he's already created the fourth branch of government, namely himself. So, I said, are you suggesting that between now and next year we could have a serial impeachment never before undertaken in the history of this great country? She said, "Look, I'll leave all that to you. All we know is that Now is the time. We've got to move. And so, between thousands, tens of thousands of friends like that, I don't need any enemies, folks. I really have my plate full. Then, here on the other hand, we have an administration that's clearly trying to wait out the clock. They're slow walking everything we do. You ask for email. Now, when the Republican National Committee starts using executive privilege as a reason not to give you documents, of course, they were operating out of the White House, so they said, well, we claim executive privilege too. Of course, that got so funny that they dropped that. But here we are in a situation trying to, after several months, just determine who pulled this list of 9 U.S. attorneys together and why were they released. And, of course, on the House side, we leave this to Senators Leahy and Schumer. On the House side, we don't even care to call Attorney General Gonzalez anymore. After you say, I don't recall and I'll get back to you 54 times in one session before a committee, you say, well, we're not going to continue to do that. Well, then let's get rid of him. Well, not so fast, friends. While he is there, we want to examine every part of the Department of Justice, which incidentally has not been oversighted in many, many years, and that includes the Democratic administrations, when going back even to Jack Brooks, when he was the distinguished chairman. So we find that everything becomes an issue, and we understand that. Harriet Myers and her lawyer were talking with us about the conditions in which she would come before the committee, and abruptly she sent word that she was not even going to show up. Now, this former Supreme Court nominee knows that customarily you come before the committee with your lawyer and explain why you're taking the fifth or the executive privilege or whatever you care to use as the reason that you're not going to give answers to questions from the members of the Judiciary Committee. She didn't show up at all. And I've successfully talked the members out of using the second process system that we have, where we can send the U.S. Marshals out to arrest her directly without the U.S. attorneys. But the thought of a grandmotherly lady in shackles standing before the House of Representatives is something that even my friends that want immediate relief didn't think would be a very good idea. So we're going to pursue it through the courts and then have the U.S. Attorney direct it to serve her and ask her to come before the committee. But what is it all about? Well, it's not breaking news that the Department of Justice has been politicized. And it didn't start with Alberto Gonzalez either. And it may not have started with John Ashcroft. And what we're saying is that this gives us a chance to make absolutely certain that the kind of blatant politicizing that has been admitted under oath was going on, that it not only discontinue, but that we make it really become the law enforcement arm of the federal government of which we can all be proud. We need as depoliticized Department of Justice as we can get, and that's what I'll be working toward. Now, inside the Department of Justice that we're going to oversight, there's nothing more important to me than the integrity of the ballot and the voting process coming up next year. And we have a lot to do. Mr. Overton has been a witness before us and has a book out on it. We have Mark Crispin Miller has a book that I think was aptly named Fooled Twice that has come out on this subject. And so what we're trying to do now is make sure that everyone can vote. We've got the Voter Rights Act. We've got the appropriate constitutional amendments. But we know that we still have a lot of work to do. The irregularities in Florida you all know about in the intervention of the Supreme Court. But in Ohio, that is not as well known as to what happened there. And so we held hearings, that were informal hearings, in Columbus, Ohio. And I never can remember facing hundreds and hundreds of angry Ohioans who were mad that what had happened to them in terms of the location of the machines, of the deliberately bad information about a Secretary of State, Blackwell, who's was at the same time co-chair of the Ohio Bush Re-election Committee. They were angry, and they weren't just African Americans. There were people who I presume were independents and some Republicans who were angry at what happened, and that the process had been so blatant, had been so terrible for so many folks there that shockingly watched it. And what we learned out of that is that we've got to be very careful about this electronic voting business, because now there are the experts from Diebold and other places that do this, that they can come in and ask the nice poll workers who volunteer once or twice a year, and we had testimony to this effect. Look, you folks stand back. We can make sure that the tally and the machine comes out close enough so that you don't have to do a manual recount. Oh, great. And with that little key, they can affect not just a machine, they can affect whole systems of electronic voting. And so there are a lot of us beginning to say just a paper trail isn't enough. Paper jams, just like anything else. And I never thought I would come before lawyers and judges and scholars and say, you know, paper ballots weren't that bad after all. We need to make sure that we perfect this system. And so I come here letting you know that that's the first thing on my Judiciary Committee agenda. Now, it is also important for you to know of another concern that's recently come to my attention. And that is that the rule of law that has gradually developed among nations that started back in the 40s with Churchill and Roosevelt, and how they have put together this system. And I studied it in law school. I don't know why I remember Professor Schumann for international law or international relations. And at that time, the understanding was that this was very experimental. We don't know if it'll work. It's going to, a lot of nations aren't willing in the name of peace to compromise their sovereignty. The United Nations is this, that, and the other. But here in this administration, we've had a deliberate undercutting of the international treaties, the protocols, the conventions, the deal with Kyoto, the creation of an international criminal court, torture. All of these things are now in very great disrepair. We're moving back as the two countries, ironically, with Churchill and Roosevelt that pulled it together. We now have more and more unraveling of these international conventions with Bush and Blair. And so I went to China this year, and I was amazed. I'd been once with Chairman Brooks 20 years ago. But now, as I talked with Professor Susan Shirk, who wrote the book China, Fragile Superpower, because I see this as if we don't come together, we're going to start going apart. And how you put together the kind of relationship with China, and there are members of your society that are going to China this year, and they were anxious about the rule of law. They weren't anxious about it. They were probably telling me that they were trying to bring the rule of law into their governing. The only problem, we knew that the Communist National Committee Party, they call up the court, the judges, and tell them what the ruling's going to be. So you have this tremendous contradiction between a communist state trying to emerge as all of the cities are now modern and westernized, but they're still working it out, and it's very, very difficult. Let me tell you that all of the Chinese leaders, including a two-star general that he wasn't following us around, but he was always there to be helpful. In a moment of the incessant number of toasts that are requisite at these dinners, he said, "Oh, by the way, my kids go to school in the United States, in California." And we heard that time and time again, that their children were being sent to American schools. We met with the judges in Beijing, and they were telling us with some pride that they were now beginning to experiment with the presumption of innocence in their court proceedings, and they were very proud to announce that. But we know that in most of China, that word hasn't gotten out at all. And so I invite those of you who have this interest in international relations, how we get a rule of law for the family of nations. 192 countries, 6 and almost a half billion people on the face of the earth. How do we move in this new direction that is so important since weapons of mass destruction are so prevalent and among so many people? And I can't help but recall as I close my remarks that it was our militarist, non-diplomatic approach that has probably created more new young terrorists than any one other single thing that I can think of. And so we've got to develop a courage and a skill to deal with the leaders of these countries. Many of our international programs are now suspect. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and others that have taken the ability of developing countries to stand up on their own. Now they find themselves saddled in debt that leads to the overthrow or the weakening, destabilizing of the government that was supposed to be helped by these world agencies. And so the challenges are here. You can't handle all of them, but as you know, this organization that has come so far in 5 years can handle some of them. And to the extent that we encourage a democratic process of voting and elections in our country, we'll be sending, as to me, the best signal to all of these other struggling nations that would emulate the great Constitution that has guided us over these several hundred years. So I join you to say thank you to the young and those not so young, to please stay the course. This crossroads that we're at is not theoretical, it's for real. Someone just wrote a book about it can happen in America. And lawyers who to me constitute one of the really great professions in our society, are exactly the ones to help keep America great and grow a new understanding that has to go with us being the largest, most powerful, wealthiest nation in the history of civilization. And those are the thoughts on my mind as I share them with you on this wonderful evening. Thank you very much for having invited me.